Good morning, my fellow Canadians. Well, here we go again. Guns, evil, nasty guns, are on the chopping block. It's no secret in the firearms community that Trudeau and his Liberals have enacted legislation that is absolutely ineffective, draconian, useless, and out and out stupid, and is selling it or trying to sell it to the Canadian population as a measure of public safety. Now, anybody with a brain, and by that I exclude anybody who votes Liberal or NDP, anybody with a brain or any degree of objectivity knows that this is a lie. There's nothing here about public safety, not a single blessed thing. Brian Lilly has done tremendous columns on this. Lauren Gunther has done columns on this. All voices preaching in the wilderness, trying to reach people about the facts of this upcoming legislation. I think one of the things that bothers me the most about this is the lies are so blatant. I mean, blatant, overt. I can't think of an analogy that can adequately express my frustration at the obvious lies. We're dealing with the most deceptive, dishonest, divisive, corrupting, autocratic regime in Canadian history. And don't call it a government. It's a regime. It's the rule of one moron and a bunch of toadies, everybody feathering their own nest at the expense of the Canadian electorate. It's nothing other than that. This is not a democracy. Lying has become the norm from the Liberals. In fact, to say that the Liberals lie is like saying the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. This is a given. Do you understand? It's a constant. There is no debate about this. Trudeau promised open and transparent government, if you recall, when he was elected. It is the direct opposite. It is secretive, deceptive, dishonest. What happened to the claim of an open and transparent government? He's being investigated. The investigative committees that were formed to look into his ethics violations and criminality, overt, out and out criminality, those committees have been shut down by his decree. How can you do that? Try that as a citizen. You're arrested for an offense and you say, no, I'm shutting down the court. No. I was talking with a friend of mine. I brought up the fact that everything flows from one simple concept. And when you understand this, everything else sort of becomes clear. Trudeau is stupid. Do you understand? We're not talking simple-minded. We're not talking naivete. We are talking a very, very, very limited intellect, if you can even use the word applied to Trudeau. I don't know if it's true, but there was a meme posted some time ago where one of Trudeau's past professors said that without doubt Trudeau was the stupidest student ever to attend his classes. So understand this, Trudeau is stupid. There is no morality, there are no ethics, there is no intellect at play here. He reads lines. That's all he does. He reads lines. You've seen anybody, again, who's objective and has watched, has seen Trudeau try to ad-lib and just fall flat in his face. He is stupid, but he's insulated from the consequences of his stupidity by his youth, his appearance, and his wealth, and lack of accountability. Who holds him accountable? When you own the courts and law enforcement and you control them, who holds him accountable? And the NDP, of course, that idiot Dogmeat Singh, just rubber stamping everything Trudeau does. Where can you ever expect, when could you ever expect open government or accountability? And of course, you've got that approximately 20% of the Canadian electorate, 20%, that's all that Trudeau governs by. I speak for all Canadians. You speak for 20% of idiots who voted for you, approximately. This is according to Elections Canada. And the other stupid Canadians, the 40 some odd percent, 46%, that never even bothered to cast their ballots, when you fill up your tank and you bitch about the price of gas, and you bitch about the stupidity and the deception of this government, look in a mirror, idiot. You never got out there and voted. It's on you. Shut up. Don't complain. You lost your right to complain when you failed to exercise your democratic right to vote. So now he's back after firearms. My own personal experience after having fought this fight for well over 30, 40 years about common sense firearms legislation. If you look at the counter arguments or those who support Trudeau's initiatives, almost invariably when you talk to them, the information they put out is either repeating the government lies with no research. They approach firearms, their counter arguments are based on emotionalism or misinformation or ignorance. Not on data, not on fact, not on reality. These are the counter arguments that I hear, that I've heard. I watched that interview, I mentioned it in a previous post, where someone went downtown Toronto with a mic, was asking people about the anti-gun legislation and the number of people who supported it and knew absolutely nothing about firearms. The lie that he puts forward, and I mean, it is so frustrating to me. This law will not affect law-abiding gun owners. That is the only people it will negatively impact. Could you be more blatant in your lie? And people will still repeat this, and their toadies in the media will repeat this. In spite of all the evidence, in spite of all the fact, in spite of all the data, they will just repeat the lie because Trudeau said it or the Liberals said it. We used to be a common sense people, a pragmatic people, a capable and competent people. What the hell has happened to my Canada that someone could put information like this out and have it promulgated? Well, of course, the press and the media, mainstream media, is owned by the Liberals and by the government, so they'll just do whatever they're told to do, and they'll say whatever they're told to say. They're not an information system anymore. They're a propaganda machine for the Liberal government. The mainstream media, CRTC, is supposed to make journalists adhere to the Code of Journalistic Ethics. And I don't know if it's true, but a friend of mine says that this is their purview to oversee journalistic ethics and that journalistic standards are upheld. But the CRTC is a government organization and they just rubber stamp the lies that are put forward, and again, no accountability, no consequence for these lies. Australia put forward draconian firearms legislation. And if you look at the crime rate in Australia, it has spiked. The crime rate in Australia is astounding because criminals know that the average citizen no longer has access to firearms. Britain, their anti-firearms legislation has been a total failure. The murder rate in Britain is much higher than the authorities admit. And the way they do this, and it's really neat, they have a cute little system. Let me postulate a scenario. You've had a complaint or a bitch on about a neighbor or an ex or a spouse or whatever. So you go illegally and purchase a firearm, which is very easy to do in Britain in spite of the fact it's an island nation. You purchase a firearm, you lay an ambush for your target, you come out, you empty your firearm into this individual, kill them dead. Okay, clear case, premeditated murder. The British government doesn't like murder by firearms. So what they'll do, they'll then say, listen, you plead to a reduced sentence. We'll charge you with manslaughter. Take the plea. You'll do less time. So of course you'll do less time. You've got a good lawyer, works out a good plea deal with the government. So instead of doing 25 years for, or being sentenced to 25 years for murder, you're sentenced to 5 years or 10 years for manslaughter. But you see, now it doesn't go into the books as a firearm murder. You get it? And I love the way they skew statistics and numbers. Firearm deaths versus firearm murders. If you look at firearm deaths, they are much greater. But you've got, in there, you have accidental shootings. You have suicides. This is a firearm death, not a murder. But you can bump up the numbers by doing shit like this. Sophistry and word games. I read a statistic, and this is from the CDC, not the NRA or a pro-firearms group. The CDC published that firearms intervention by legally entitled, honest, upright citizens, right? They've intervened in a crime, either prevented or stopped criminal activity by a criminal. Armed citizens have stepped up and stopped or prevented it between 500,000 to 3 million times per year. That's the US. Think of those numbers. And you look at the number of murders by firearm versus those numbers. What would the firearm murder rate be in the United States if a citizen, an armed, responsible citizen, had not intervened? That, of course, is never mentioned by the anti-firearms people. And they can't turn around and say, oh, this is the NRA producing a skewed statistic. This is from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. So what will happen with Canada's firearms legislation? Will it impact criminality? It will make life more difficult for the legal, law-abiding firearm owner and accomplish nothing to create a safer society. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Nichего. And yet, there are people who will say, well, he's making us safer. All we are seeing is another erosion of the rights of Canadian citizens. Forget the whole issue that it's firearms. It's just another erosion of your basic rights and freedoms. And if anybody thinks it is anything less than the Liberals pushing a personal agenda and lying about both its effect and its intent, then you're stupid enough to vote Liberal. So there's my little rant for the morning.